that we've seen shows that that's the truth. So their clinical evidence comes from watching human beings in life doing what they do. It comes from watching what happens to people when they eat certain plants, certain vegetables, certain foods, put certain oils on their body. Oh, I put this oil on my body. Next day my skin is burning hot. Next day my skin is cool. Next day my skin is moist. Next day my skin is dry. Okay, let's see if that happens on a second person. Let's see if that happens on a third person. Most moms will do this with their kids, right? And your kids are your guinea pigs. That's your clinical evidence. And the mom say, I swear by this. Your grandma did it, I did it, your aunt did it, this is what I do. And so that evidence is called home remedies, or what do they call them? Grandmothers' wives' tales, or something like that. That's the basis for clinical evidence. That's real clinical evidence according to Ayurveda. And Nyaya is the logical inquiry about truth that says, there's some principles in it, but basically it says, you don't go with some rat or some clinical trial where you're not allowed to take any other medicines or do things that you would normally do in life and call that as evidence. That's not real evidence. There are also other philosophies. The nature of our conduct in society is Mamamsa. These are obviously very abbreviated. There's a lot more to these philosophies. Vedanta is a way of looking at the Vedas, which is the religious side of Hinduism. But it's our way of finding our connection in the universe without using a priest or a go-between. And Vedanta, people who follow Vedanta look at a spiritual connection for themselves with the universe. And it basically answers the question, why I am here? What is the purpose of my life? That's the basic question about Vedanta. So these are the philosophies that contributed to Ayurveda. In English terms, there are doctors who have taken Ayurveda and said, you know, these things actually, they do apply to America. It's not that it's only in India that this works. And in the 80s, people used to say Ayurveda is only good in India. Because unless you have a maid to cook you your dal and your rice every day, it doesn't work. But there are people who say, no, you can actually get this to work here. Let's put this over here. Dean Ornish is a guy who studied in, well, he studied in India, but he studied with some yogis. And he was a medical student at the time, and he published some articles at a time when heart disease could not be reversed, saying, you know what, you can reverse heart disease if you just do a few things. One is you eat a vegetarian diet. You can't say vegetarian, that sounds like hippies. This is back in the 60s and 70s. So he said, okay, I won't call it vegetarianism, I'll call it a plant-based diet. So now it's called a plant-based diet. And he said, and you know, meditation is really good. Well, you can't call it meditation, so they call it mind-body connection. Do you want to get some water? No. You good? Okay. And he also believed in yoga, but he couldn't call it yoga asana, so he had to call it exercise movement. So he put together these programs, and he actually has a whole, how many of you know his group out in South Korea, right? Yeah, the National Prevention, yeah, he has a heart disease prevention institute. And what he says is that, you know, healing is actually happening. Modern medicine teaches us, how many of you are in the modern medical field in some way? Okay, so, and I know Sangeeta is as well. It says that when you progress in a disease, you actually get sick. Ayurveda says disease and getting sick is not progress. Progress is when you get better. So a disease progression toward death is what modern medicine looks toward and what they classify. Dean Ornish and Ayurvedic people say, you know, the body has a capacity to heal itself. Rather than investing time in classifying how the body gets sick and worse, let's get things out of the way so that the body can heal and give it that guidance so that it can heal. And how do we do that? The science of Ayurveda teaches us how to get out of our own way and to put the things from nature around us so we can heal. Second is tune into nature. Now this is such an important tool. I've been doing this slide in my talks for 10 years, and I just read this the other day and I got a deeper level of it. I live in Manhattan. There aren't a lot of trees around, and I thought that was okay. And it's only been recently that I've realized that nature is not just pretty and not just nice. There is something about us being in nature, which has its own ecosystem of flow, that gives us a healing kind of healing injection. It helps us to heal. And the deal is this. Nature has ebbs and flows. It's a cycle. There's ebbs and flows going on all the time. No matter how much we destroy the environment, no matter how much we get rid of that ozone layer, spring comes and fall comes. And it just keeps circling. There are 3 cycles like this that have ebbs and flows that continue to be on this planet. And even if we live the most urban life and have our lights on at night and sleep during the day and don't eat foods in season and don't do things in the environment, in the natural environment, we're very plugged up in our kind of modern urban homes, there are still 3 ebbs and flows. One, and they're all based on astrophysics, by the way, because Ayurveda is based on the relationship of the larger environment, including the stars and the planets, and the moon and the sun with the earth, and then on our level. The first of the ebbs and flows is a daily cycle, and that has to do with what? Sorry, that has to do with the earth spinning around on its own axis, which is tilted. And that gives us day, night, day, night. So the ebb and flow is day, night, day, night. And we have an organ in our body as humans that tunes us into that day, night, day, night. Do you guys know what that organ is? Yeah, well, it's the pineal gland of the brain, right? And that pineal gland puts out hormones that tell us day, night, day, night. And there are many scientific studies showing that if you do not respect that, you can get very sick. And people actually go loony. They have all kinds of higher rates of disease. And they get very sick emotionally and then physically. So there are 3 groups of people that they've done studies on, especially like night drivers, night truck drivers, which is a big concern because they're driving on the roads. Nurses, because they're dispensing medication. A lot of nurses work the night shift. And airline pilots, because they're flying all night and they're going through these time zone changes regularly. And they get very, very sick. And there's actually a higher rate of weird diseases like aplastic anemias and stuff in airline pilots because they get so much radiation from being in those planes. So this ebb and flow is the daily cycle. And we have it programmed in our brain. And we should be sleeping at night and we should be awake during the day. And Ayurveda says that if you are sick, start paying attention to that. Pay attention to when you go to bed and when you wake up. Second cycle or rhythm is another ebb and flow, and that's due to the earth with the moon around it. The moon is going around it, right? So the earth is spinning on its own cycle, but the moon is going around. And what's that cycle called? It's a lunar cycle, exactly. And that's about a month long. It's about 28 days long. And that also has something in the human body that corresponds and pays attention to it. And that has, yeah, that's the menstrual cycle. And some would argue that men are more affected than women are by it, but with the PMSing that happens these days. But we have a cycle in our bodies that tells us about the lunar cycle, and that we should pay attention to it. So about 10 years ago, it was the in thing to take these birth control pills. Everyone was taking a birth control pill to have your period when you want to. Do you remember those pills? And you could take them, and they would keep you controlled. And there were some problems that happened with that. You know, it's an important thing for us to have our cycles regularly, monthly. Okay, the third cycle, ebb and flow again, is due to the Earth rotating around the sun. Exactly, and that's called a solar cycle, which is about a year long. And what we have in our body that corresponds to that is our 5 senses. So we know that now we should be wearing, well, maybe not today because it's gorgeous out, but we should be wearing warmer clothes now. And we're certainly wearing warmer clothes than we did when we, in July. And we'll be wearing even warmer clothes come January. And we'll do that, and we'll continue to have that ebb and flow. And our foods will change. And you will notice, if you're in tune with your body, that your food cravings will change. Your desire to have more warm and more moist foods is going to increase now. You're going to notice that. And part of you will not want all the sweets, will not want all the rich foods. You'll want things that are more like the pumpkins, which are more grounding, root vegetables, and you'll want watery soups. You won't want that pureed, what's that, clam chowder, New England clam chowder that has all that cream in it. You won't want that so much. If you're in tune with your body, you'll see that, and that has to do with the seasons. So this tuning into nature has to do with being aware of the ebbs and flows. And Ayurveda talks about this very much. And when I get into the principles of Vata, Pitta, Kapha, you're going to see that there's a lot to do with tuning into nature. So if nothing else, if you can't remember the Vata, Pitta, Kapha stuff, remember this, that if you feel ungrounded, go for a walk in nature. At some point, if you can, take your shoes off and plant your actual feet into the soil, onto the grass, into the soil. Make it a practice to do that. And I actually do that. I have a park. I got my office, so it's on the other side of a park, so I walk across the park to my office. And I will routinely just take off my shoes and just kind of stand like in the soil. People think I'm nuts. I hug trees. I do all kinds of things that are kind of weird. But it's okay. They can think I'm nuts. I need to do that, and I find that that's a really good way of grounding, especially if like some kind of crisis has happened. And you know, when I'm a doctor, there are crises. People die. There's all kinds of freak accidents that happen, and they're a little bit jarring. And I don't know how most doctors take it. Well, I do know. What they do is they usually drink. Come on, let's go out for a drink. They go out for a smoke. You know, there's a huge number of physicians that smoke. And I kind of wonder, like, what's that about? There are a lot of them that do drugs, which, you know, we don't need to talk about. And a lot of them will not admit this to you, but they have very unhealthy relationships, because the way that they deal with their stress is they go home and they take it out on their kids, their spouses, their family members. So instead of doing that, if they would just go into nature and let nature have all of it. You know, my mother would say to me, go out to the trees and cry to them, because they can take that in. And nature does. It will take in all of your sorrow. And this is the concept of ashrams, right? So ashrams are a place where you can go that you won't suffer. It will take back suffering from you. So it's a haven for that. Okay, so tuning into nature. And you guys have more nature up here in Connecticut. And all of you are within, you know, a few miles of a state park or some. If you don't have a backyard yourself, you can get to nature pretty easily. So take that as advice for, you know, one of your practical hints. This third one I've already talked about, and that's perception and working with your senses. And really working on cleaning your 5 senses. And we're going to talk about that in a bit. So I've talked about these main tenets. The only one that I want to mention that I haven't talked about in detail is that a little while ago I said that Ayurveda believes that all of our diseases, 90% of our diseases at least, start in the mind or the gut. So how does that work? So there's this big canal that runs through the middle of our bodies. That's actually outside of our bodies. It's just this tube that runs through. It goes from the mouth to the anus. And we take in food, and whatever is useful that our body wants to take in, hopefully useful, it will take in and takes across these barriers and puts them into our bloodstream, and then sends it right to our liver, which says too much of this, too little of that, balances it out, and then sends it around to the rest of the body. That canal has many very intelligent stop points on it. First of all, in the gut, we have something called the enteric nervous system. We have a lot of nerves. And you've all heard of the brain and the spinal cord being our central nervous system. And you've heard of the parts outside of the brain being the peripheral nervous system. But in medical school, we actually have a paragraph in our anatomy book that talks about the enteric nervous system. We have more ganglia or fusions of nerves in our gut than we do in our entire brain. And yet, modern medicine will not study the enteric nervous system. Ayurveda did. Ayurveda said, there's a reason why people say, I knew it in my gut. It was a gut instinct. I just felt it in my gut. We know things in our gut. We have knowledge there. There's actually a nervous system that has truth in our gut. And it's packed with nerves. More nerves than are in your brain. So if we know that, then why is modern medicine not studying that? I mean, I asked some really obvious questions. You know, and of course in residency I'd get sent to the chairman's office and I'd get in all kinds of trouble because I was asking all these, you know, terrible, terrible questions. But doesn't it seem obvious? Wait, quantitatively we know that there are, you know, X billion